Hello, my name is Beck and welcome to a video where I talk about some things that I have recently been watching because we're all in quarantine. I don't usually watch the amount of stuff that I've been watching, usually because you see all these books behind me, usually I'm reading, but at the moment I've also been watching stuff to break up my time. So I thought I would talk about the few things that I have recently been enjoying. Thankfully, my family signed up for Disney Plus, which means that I have a login and I ended up watching Onward. It follows the story of a single mum with two sons, and on the 16th birthday of the youngest son, they end up finding this magical spell to summon their father for one day. And this is a world where elves exist, but magic has kind of started to simmer down in favor of technology instead. So it's like an urban setting because it's got America in it, but it also has creatures and elves, like I've said, in it as well. It's kind of all wound together, but the core of this story is very brotherly and family connected, and it was brilliantly woven with its humor as well. So we follow these two brothers and they try and summon their father. It doesn't go quite as planned, and they only have one day to find the rest of the power to enact the spell, and that's what their quest involves. And they get into a lot of shenanigans on this quest, and this movie made me cry, and I watched it with my partner and he was like, I love this film. It's become a new favorite of both of us because we both loved its story and its animation, and visually it was quite pleasing as well, and we both really liked the ending. We didn't expect it to end the way that it did, and I like the little twists that it had in there, and I love the way that it impacted me emotionally because I was bawling my eyes out. I love this movie so much. It had such strong themes in it of family and love and identity. It was beautiful and I can't hype it up enough, and that is why I included it on this list first. Now the next one that I want to talk about is called The Old Guard, and it's on Netflix, and I'm assuming a lot of people have seen this movie already because it was quite popular, at least on social media, when it initially came out, and it follows these characters. I want to talk about it, but the more I tell you about it, the more it spoils the impact of the opening. So I'm going to try and be very careful about telling you what it involves. But these characters that we're introduced to, they are obviously military-esque kind of characters. They seem like the lone rogue or the lone wolf that have found each other over time. And so they've kind of formed this cohort of like a fractured found family kind of dynamic. And if you watch my bookish videos, then you know that found family is one of the tropes in books that I adore. So it made sense that I loved that theme in this film as well. But the characters that we get introduced to are quite worldly. They've been around a bit, and then they get to this place where they're supposed to enact a deal, and everything flips. It does like a 180 compared to what they thought they were walking into, and it turns quite dangerous for them all. And there's a scene that makes you kind of hold your breath in shock, like, oh my god, they did that to their characters already, and we're only in the beginning of the movie, and then the penny drops. And that moment is what absolutely hooked me to, I'm gonna love this movie. And obviously I love this movie because it continued to deliver in that way in terms of character and the way that it built up the different characters in this world. And we follow a character that is quite used to this way of living, and then we follow a character who is very new to this way of living. So we get them clashing and we get their disparity, and you can tell that I'm being very careful about describing what goes on. But it's set in like an urban setting in our world, but it has like a fantastical twist to it as well. Not with like supernatural creatures or elves in the same way that Onward had it, but in more of a subtle way. And I like that power played into that as well. I didn't know what this movie was about going into it, and I think that's one of the reasons, or one of the underlying reasons that I loved it so much. I also love the relationship between two men in the movie. I found it romantic and adorable and hilarious, and also it had a lot of history that it didn't have to explain to us in order for us to understand. And I love it when a show or a book builds up that character development without dumping the information in my lap in favor of letting us sit with it. So again, I think it was put together beautifully and it was a very well done movie. I think it's also based on a comic book as well, so it probably had material to draw from in that sense too, but obviously I loved it, and that's why it's on this list. And now we are revealing that I love a good romantic comedy because I tend to read and consume a lot of fantasy and a lot of sci-fi and a lot of apocalyptic stories, but I really have a soft spot for watching romantic comedy movies or series. Never Have I Ever on Netflix was one of them. It's very young adult in the way that it's formulaic because this girl, she is trying to wrestle with her American/Indian culture. She doesn't really know where she sits, and on top of that, she just wants to have sex and have a boyfriend and have the quote-unquote unquote high school experience that she wants to have. But she's using that drive as like a mask because her father has recently passed away, and so she's really deeply dealing with grief, and she's quite an angry and impulsive character in general, but she's got that layered effect that made me really care about her. And yes, there's a love triangle, yes, there's a ton of cheesiness in here, yes, there's a ton of cliches, but I actually found that in every episode I was either shedding a tear or bawling my eyes out because of the emotional impact that it had, because it had such a strong cultural element of our main character feeling unbalanced, not knowing where she should be in the world, but also knowing where she wanted to be in the world, and having to grapple with that image of herself and also grapple with the grief that she was trying to ignore but has to actually deal with. And it is told in present day but also in little flashbacks as like vignettes between the main story, and so you get to see her relationship with her father as well, and that to me showed me what she'd lost, and so that made it so heartbreaking to me. But also I was laughing at it too, and I was rolling my eyes, and I found it ridiculous, and it's meant to not take itself seriously, and that's what I quite liked about it. So Never Have I Ever was a lot of fun. Probably wouldn't pick it up as a book because I don't read that kind of tropiness, I guess, but as a film I just eat it up, and I ate this series up so fast. I think I finished it in like a day, and if I find a series that I end up liking visually, then I'm just like, I snap it up and I finish it in a day or in no time at all. So that is definitely what I did with this one as well. Next, this one's a bit embarrassing, but to hell with it. I loved it anyway. It was very cheesy. It was very ridiculous. And when I say the title, you'll be like, oh, I don't know what I expected. High School Musical, the musical, the series on Disney Plus was a way for me to revisit my obsession and love with High School Musical, the movies, as a kid, but in a modern day setting that didn't take itself seriously and was very meta, because we follow these kids who are going to the same high school that High School Musical was set in, but they're also aware that High School Musical was filmed there, and they're all fans in the show of the movies. So these kids are now auditioning to be part of a musical at their school, and that musical is High School Musical. So it's very meta, it's very funny, and there are like Troy and Gabriella characters, and I love seeing the way that the show became more diverse than High School Musical and Disney allowed High School Musical to be, because it's come out that the character Ryan in the original movies was supposed to be gay, but Kenny Ortega, the director who is gay, couldn't actually explicitly say it, so he just implied it through Ryan's flamboyance in the movies. Now that diversity is becoming more represented in media, again, I know it's slow going, but some is better than none, and I would rather it become more prevalent, and this series is kind of pushing for that. I really like the way that this series explored not only diversity but also varying relationships with families. So the main character's parents are dealing with a potential divorce, and they're not like a happy family. I like that Disney is deviating from the happy family model in their works or their films and movies and series to something else, and that's what this series did. This series was just as corny and just as cheesy as you would expect. When I was watching it, I kind of had a little bit of a cringe reaction and secondhand embarrassment to certain things that happened in the story, but overall, as like a blanket or umbrella statement, I loved this series, and I am highly anticipating season 2 because I need some cheese in my life, and I definitely am looking forward to the continuation because I believe they did get renewed for a season 2. Next is an oldie but a goodie, and it is She's the Man. Everyone will be pretty much familiar with She's the Man. It's like the rom-com staple of movies that we watched in like the early 2000s. It has Amanda Bynes as the star, it has Channing Tatum as the love interest. Viola, Amanda Bynes' character, wants to become a soccer player and defeat the rival team for her school, but her school cuts the soccer team that are the women. So she ends up pretending to be her twin brother Sebastian and going to his school instead while he is off overseas for 2 weeks so that she can train to become a soccer player in this alternate school's team and then beat the team that her ex-boyfriend is on from her old school, because obviously they had a falling out and he's a misogynist pig. And so it's such a good movie, and it's so funny and so cheesy, and I remembered basically every scene in the movie. I remembered the dialogue in the movie, and because it's a pandemic and a lot of stuff at the moment is hard to predict, hard to control, we don't know what's going on, it was just nice to revisit a movie where I knew the formula and I knew the outcome and I knew the characters and I connected to them, and it was like old and comfortable and familiar and funny, and that was exactly the way I felt. I loved this movie, and I will rewatch it until the end of time because She's the Man, The Duff, Burlesque and Easy A are like my top rom-com chick flick movies, and I will go and rewatch them until the cows come home because they just bring me so much joy. Next is another series that I wasn't really taking seriously, and then my best friend recommended it to me, and I was like, well, she's recommended some of my favorite books, so maybe I should check out this Netflix series. And I did, and it's Sex Education, and I smashed the entire 2 seasons in 2.5 days. Not even. I barely moved. I just consumed this series, and it's about this boy who I actually recognized from being in Merlin, the BBC series, ages ago. So it's about this guy, and he's a teenager going to school, and he is struggling with sex and coming to terms with his body, mostly because his mum is a sex therapist, and so his life is constantly been talked about in a sexual context with very open discussions with his mother and his mother's clients. And so at the school that he goes to, a lot of kids are engaging in sex, and there's not really a proper sex education there. And so all of these kids have these questionable problems, but they don't have anybody to go and confide in. So he ends up kind of echoing his mother, and because he's been involved and around sex therapy from the time he was little, he ends up taking clients and talking them through and giving them advice in a sex education way. This series has so much representation of sexuality and gender diversity compared to anything else I've seen before. And going into a show called Sex Education, I just expected it to be, you know, hetero, the main things that we always see, and it really wasn't. It was incredible in the sense that it also had such varying family dynamics, because the main character's mum is divorced. She's a single mum. There are other characters who have parents who are struggling with drugs and addiction, and so they're looking out for themselves. They don't have a parental figure. And there are characters who have negative relationships with their parents, positive relationships with their parents. And on top of that, there is bisexuality, there are lesbians, there are queer characters, there are pansexual characters, there are ace characters. It's just incredible with the amount this conveys, and everyone also is very happy with their bodies, which is really nice to see. And it just had such a positive engagement with the subject matter, and I think that's why I liked it so much, because it was very honest and it wasn't trying to preach in any way, and it was like, here I am, take me or leave me, this is what I'm like. And I love that for the characters. It also had a harmful trope in it, but it was very self-aware of that trope, and it actually called itself on it. And that trope is the bully who turns out to not be straight later on, and one of the characters we know is gay starts to have kind of feelings for him, and so the main character called him on it and was like, dude, he has bullied you for your entire life. And so that ends up becoming part of the narrative as well, and it's not, you know, oh yeah, he bullied me but now I love him. It's not superficial in any way, and I love that this show was not superficial at all in any sense. So I loved how raw it was, I loved how funny it was, and I just loved how honest it was in everything it conveyed, because the characters do stuff that make you frustrated, but then you're like, hang on, they're 16, of course they're going to do stuff that makes you frustrated and is kind of illogical because they're 16. Honestly, I wish the next series had already come out, but I clearly have to wait and I really don't want to. And then the last series on this list is one that's quite ridiculous, but it has been filling the void that Supernatural left in teenage me's heart, and it is Lucifer. And Lucifer follows this guy who actually is Lucifer. He's come from hell. He wants to just establish his life in the human world and live life's pleasures, basically. But what happens is that he starts to get interested and involved with this woman named Chloe Decker, and Chloe Decker is a detective, and Lucifer's influence or his mojo doesn't work on Decker, and he's like, why? So that's what intrigues him about her. So he can coerce them into revealing their deepest desires to him. But with Decker, she'll look at him and be like, no, what are you talking about? We've got to do this, and do something else entirely. It's just great that they have that argumentative, playful, fun dynamic, because that buddy cop formula is something that I really enjoy as well. And while Lucifer's behavior is quite alarming, you've also got to remind yourself that he's actually not human. So he's trying to become more emotive and learn to respect or understand himself using other people as a model. And it's just such a ridiculous show, and it does such dumb things, but it also doesn't take itself seriously whatsoever. And I think that's why I love it, because it doesn't hold itself to this higher standard, and the scenes that are in it are comedy first rather than tension, although it does do darkness and tension in certain ways quite well too. But I pretty much consumed an entire season in a day, and now I've gone to look up, you know, behind the scenes, bloopers and cast interviews, so it means that I'm loving this series as well. It's not a series that I necessarily recommend to everybody, but for my personal taste, I found it quite funny, quite ridiculous, and sometimes I've rolled my eyes a little bit, and sometimes I've gone, oh, really. And sometimes I've been a little bit alarmed by Lucifer's reaction to things, or Decca's dismissal of Lucifer's reactions, because if I was Decca, I'd be like, this guy is a bit of a sociopath and quite terrifying, not safe, goodbye. But it's a show, it's supposed to be ridiculous, and it doesn't take itself seriously, so it knows it's supposed to be ridiculous. So that's why I'm really loving Lucifer at the moment. I've just started season 2, and I believe there are 5 seasons, so I'm quite looking forward to continuing on. Those are the things that I have recently been watching and recently been enjoying. One of them I know was a rewatch, but the rest of them have been new to me. So if there are any series below that you have been enjoying, do let me know. I would love to hear from you. But thank you so much for watching this video. I will chat to you in my next one, and leave a like and subscribe if you like my content. I mostly talk about books, but this video I just wanted to deviate for a little bit. But thank you again so much for tuning in, and I will see you in my next video. Bye.